Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to you. My name is Richard Orme from the DAISY Consortium, and I'm your host for today's webinar, Scaling Inclusion in the Transition to Remote Teaching. The rapid switch to online learning has in many cases amplified the barriers faced by some learners with disabilities. In this session, we will hear about analysis based on data from thousands of educational institutions, and we'll discuss pragmatic solutions for effective and efficient inclusion. Accessible resources, personalized learning, universal design. These are widely used phrases that take on increasing importance as education institutions has rapidly adapted to online and distance delivery. To what extent is 2020 the opportunity to really deliver on these concepts to ensure that no learners get left behind? Or have these noble ideals become casualties in the scramble to adapt in a crisis? How do we make sense of what's happening and take pragmatic steps to empower learners with choices and colleagues with appropriate guidelines and professional development? In this session, we'll learn about strategies and big data from an international learning technology company, blended with the lived experience from a US university to help us better think about scaling inclusion in the transition to remote teaching. I'll be back after the presentations for questions and discussion. But at this point, I'll hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Mathis. I've been in educational technology for about 14 years at this point. Worked for a number of large higher education institutions, such as the University of Cambridge, Georgia Tech, UC Berkeley. I was also one of the original founders for Ally, and I'm currently acting as the product director for Blackboard Ally. John?
Hello, everyone. I'm John Scott. I'm one of the product managers on the Blackboard Ally team. Prior to joining the Ally team, I did my doctoral work at UC Berkeley, focused on inclusive education in online course design and delivery. I also was formerly a special education teacher in K-12 and am very interested in how we can leverage data and research around accessibility to drive strategy and improve inclusion for all students. Christopher?
Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Phillips, and I am the Electronic and Information Technology Coordinator at Utah State University. We've been using Ally since 2016 on our campus, and I'm excited today to share how it has impacted how we approach accessibility and how we build inclusive courses on our campus.
Excellent. Let's dive right in. So this is a very quick overview of our agenda for today. We're essentially going to be diving into three different pillars, three different pragmatic approaches to taking an inclusive approach towards making digital course content more accessible. We'll start off by looking at some learning theories, more specifically universal design for learning, and looking at how improved accessibility can really benefit all students. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about how we can start to scale professional development and actually involve the content creators, the individual instructors, in the process of making their content, their course content, more accessible. And then lastly, we'll explore a little bit more around the role of data and analytics and how insights at the data level, at the institutional level, can be used to make data-informed decisions as well as strategic decisions. Today we'll be using Ally to provide some of these, basically as an example for some of these pragmatic approaches. So we're not going to be spending a lot of time talking about Ally as a product necessarily, but we're really going to be using Ally as a lens to kind of looking at some of those pragmatic approaches, but then also looking at the kind of the data, both the usage data as well as the accessibility data, that kind of tell us a lot more about the accessibility of content, about how students, instructors, institutions engage with that. And then Christopher will be providing the institutional story side from that as well. For those of you that are not familiar with Blackboard Ally as a tool, just very, very quickly, Blackboard Ally is a tool that that focuses on making digital course content more accessible. It does that by integrating very closely into the learning management system. And within that, it provides three main things. It provides alternative formats to students to give the students some choice in how they want to consume or engage with their content. It provides feedback and guidance to instructors to help them better understand how accessible their content is, and also help guide them through the process of making that content more accessible. And it also provides reporting at the institutional levels to help institutions better understand how accessible their data, their course content is, and how that's evolving over time. So diving into the first part of that, or really the student perspective, and this is really what we call one file doesn't fit all. And so obviously, first of all, any content that's used within a course, any course content, has to work with specific assistive technologies for students with disabilities. That's a very obvious one. Typically, this is also kind of, when we think about alternative formats for students, this is typically kind of the extent to which institutions think about that as well. And it's typically kind of that focus on students with disabilities tends to be kind of how they're internally structured, and how the support processes are set up. But if you really think about this, alternative formats are really something, or the ability to consume content in multiple ways is really something that affects all students and that all students can benefit from, especially in COVID times and an increasing amount of courses being put online. We see that students use a wide variety of devices. We have to make sure that that course content works well on those devices. We see a large body of students essentially doing everything on either their mobile device, their iPad, their ebook reader, and that's increasingly the case. We even see students complete all of their coursework, all of their homework on a mobile device. So mobile friendliness is very, very important in this. With that come things like good support for low bandwidth, for offline use, and so on. And then obviously, increasingly, students need more flexibility around their content as well. Examples of that can include maybe the ability to listen to something to listen to your course content while you're cooking, while you're doing some household chores, while you're out for a quick run. Maybe it's the ability to again very easily read something on your mobile device as you're maybe waiting somewhere for something. So the kind of the concept of alternative formats and the fact that the kind of being able to consume content in multiple ways really is something that can affect all students. And so the way in which this is addressed by Ally as a tool is that Ally will, when integrated into the learning management system, will automatically provide students with access to a range of different alternative formats based on the instructor's original. The way in which that surfaces is that whenever the instructor's original is available somewhere within the course, there will be an option right next to it that will allow the student to get the list of available alternative formats for that content item. Available alternative formats include things such as an OCR version for scanned documents, a mobile-friendly responsive HTML version, an EPUB version, an electronic braille version, an audio version, and then we've got a number of additional versions as well. But the basic idea just being that as a student, you actually now get a little bit more choice in terms of how you want to consume with that content. And with that, I'll pass it on to John to talk a little bit about what that looks like from a usage and theory point of view.
Thanks, Nicholas. We really see these alternative formats as learning tools, as tools that can empower students with choice, but also tools that can really enhance the learning process. And we see this emphasis on the multiple in a number of emerging learning and literacy theories. In universal design for learning, we see the multiple threaded across the three principles, and certainly the principle, that first principle, providing multiple modes of representation and how that can enhance cognitive processes, being able to listen to content, to interact with content, to read content in a variety of modalities and formats, really enhances those cognitive processes improves how students engage with their materials. Learner preference, such an important concept in terms of fostering metacognitive awareness, metacognitive presence, being aware of how you learn best as a learner. For so many students in higher education today, their challenges are often not necessarily related to the content, but rather to having effective study practices, being able to leverage digital tools to improve their learning process. And so when we open up choice, when we empower learners to be strategic, agentive decision makers, we can really promote that lifelong learning, help students be more successful in the long term in the ways that they learn both in school and out of school. And we also know from some of the research that improved usability through accessibility can impact time on task. It can improve how quickly students move through material and can also improve information retention. So when you're accessing an alternative format, if you have a mobile friendly format, something that works better on the phone, that usability could ultimately improve and enhance how well you're able to engage with those materials. And taking a look at our data here, on the left of the screen, I have a line graph that shows alternative format downloads by month going back to May of 2019. And this line sharply increases, particularly when we get to the spring 2020 semester. And obviously this was impacted by COVID. We saw a significant uptick in the number of downloads that were happening during the months of March and April, over 1.3 million downloads in April. This is, of course, partly related to an influx of digital content, so more digital content available inside of the learning management system, resulting in more opportunities for students to download formats, and also students being more reliant on these various alternative formats to stay engaged with their coursework. If it's looking for a low bandwidth file, if it's looking for a mobile friendly file, if it's looking for an alternative modality such as listening to the content, just an incredibly important tool for those students to be able to stay on task and stay engaged with their courses. When we look at the impact across institutions, again, just to see the increase in usage, from about 1 download per full-time enrolled student in fall 2019 to around 1.25 downloads per full-time student. So this significant increase in the usage of the formats really suggests the value to students of having access to these different types of learning materials. I'm going to pass it over to Christopher to talk about how they're using the alternative formats at Utah State.
Thank you so much, John. Prior to implementing Ally at Utah State, most of our work on course accessibility was really focused on what we would do when a student with a disability who required accommodations would sign up for a course. And then we would kind of reach out to that instructor and work on making content accessible for that specific course. However, our goal has been to really make every course accessible and all of our content as accessible as possible, and to help our instructors just recognize the need to focus on accessibility as far as making their content accessible. When we turned on Ally, as soon as we flip that switch, right away, Ally scans all of our content across every single course and made those alternative formats that Nicholas mentioned available for every single file in every single course. Now, those alternative formats that Ally provides aren't necessarily perfect, and they'll be the first to tell you that. It's an automatic conversion of that content that they do, but it does a really good job across most of our files, and that provided a reach and an impact across tens of thousands of files that we could have just never done on our own with the resources that we have. And so that integrated nature of the tool and making those alternative formats available for all of our content was a really big deal for us. The other big piece that those alternative formats, kind of the conversations that it opened up, it was a different conversation we were able to start having with faculty and instructors of our courses, to focus on how making your content accessible is not important just to the student who has a disability, but it really speaks to the universal impact that that content can have as far as creating those audio files that were mentioned. Those are used by students across our campus, regardless of their background or ability, and it really helps to kind of connect the value of making, creating accessible content and just taking that little bit of extra time to check your content to make sure it's accessible to the experience that students are having in their course and what kind of ways they can access their content. The other kind of exciting opportunity that it opened up for us, so if any of you who are working in higher ed education, when you open up a course and you see a number of PDF files that need to be accessible, that can be a frustrating experience. So here's a sample PDF file. This is not too atypical. I pulled it out of one of our courses. Now this particular PDF file isn't too difficult to read, right? It's a scan. Somebody just put a book on top of a copier. The instructor in this course, all they wanted their students to read was starting down here with 112, but there's kind of some extra front matter. Now one of the challenges with PDF files, we do have a team that can go in and make a PDF file accessible, but for anyone who's ever done that, that can be difficult and labor-intensive work and requires quite a high degree of training to kind of make a PDF file accessible. And so early on, as we used Ally, it opened up a new opportunity for us. The other challenge with PDF files in general, especially this fall as we look towards many more students doing remote learning and instruction, is that we anticipate a lot of students will be accessing their content primarily on a mobile device. And a PDF file like this, as you know, if you try to open this on a mobile device, it's either going to shrink the text down so small that it's really difficult to read, or you have to do the scrolling back and forth type of a thing. And so as was shown earlier, one of the things that Ally does, here's just inside of a Canvas course here, I can see the Ally indicator we'll talk about in a little bit that shows me that is not an accessible file. So again, we could work on just making that PDF file accessible for a student who maybe needs uses a screen reader or needs that made accessible for some other reason. But the format that Ally offers, and so I can come here and I can look at the alternative formats that Ally provides. I can see here those options that were mentioned earlier. And so we just had a developer on our team named Ludwig take the Ally tool. They have an API that they make available that's super easy to use. And now any of our instructors can come into a course, they look at their PDF files, they can click right here in Canvas and click on Convert to Canvas page. And it's going to take that PDF file. Again, we can look at what that PDF file looks like in Canvas. It's going to be that scanned PDF, difficult to read on mobile devices, not accessible. And we're going to click right here and go Convert to Canvas page. This goes out, it's going to grab that HTML that Ally produces, and then right from there I can click View that Canvas page, and boom, it's converted all of that content in that PDF file into a Canvas document. Now this is something that's going to be a lot more easier to make accessible. It's going to be more usable for all students in the classroom, and it's going to be easier for an instructor to fix and edit. Again, I would have a difficult time asking a teacher to go in and make a file accessible, but in Acrobat, a PDF file. But here I can come in and just really quickly zap all of that extra front matter, for example. That's all from a different one. And then I can, if I want to, I can make this a heading. Again, it's going to be a lot easier to do that work in Canvas, and then I'm going to have a much more user-friendly and mobile responsive piece of content at that point that's going to work for all students. And then we go in and do a little bit more cleanup, but we've actually done thousands of these file conversions at this point, where now those students, when they access content in Canvas, they don't have to download or find a PDF file, figure out how to make it work. They just click on the link and it goes right to the Canvas page. It's made it a lot easier and our content more usable for everyone. Thanks, John.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christopher. And I always think this is such a cool and creative way to use some of the value that the alternative formats provide. So thanks for sharing that. The second part that we wanted to look at is really the kind of the instructor facing side of the puzzle, and really some of the challenges that we see around getting instructors to create more accessible content from the very beginning is, on the one hand, there's a significant awareness challenge. I mean, it's very difficult as an institution to make instructors aware of the accessibility issues within their content, and then also get them to kind of effectively engage with them to get them to make their content more accessible. And typically that's done by organizing trainings, trying to get instructors to attend those trainings, and then obviously which is challenging just given how busy everyone's calendars are. And then the other thing that's challenging in that is just the fact that when you don't kind of continuously remind about those issues, or remind them about those issues, remind about those best practices, they can start to fall down the wayside over time as well. So that kind of brings us to the second part of what Ally provides, which is really that kind of that in-context feedback and guidance to instructors. So it's basically the way in which this works within Ally itself is that whenever the instructor adds some content to their course, Ally will then automatically pick up on it. We'll run it through an automated accessibility checklist. We'll assign an accessibility score to that content. And then whenever that content is used within the context of the course, the instructor will see a little indicator right next to it that gives them an idea of how accessible that item is. And then they can engage with that indicator, and that'll bring up our feedback component, which will give them some feedback, some guidance, and help guide the instructor through the process of making that content more accessible. One of the things that we really see here is by integrating it so closely within existing workflows, within the existing learning management system content, this is something that can help a lot in terms of awareness and making instructors aware of the fact that they may be having some accessibility issues. Also really helps with kind of that reminder factor, because it's always kind of there, always serves as a reminder. If you want to go forward one or two slides, John. Yep, I think we've already covered this one. The flip side of that, so Ally provides that kind of feedback to instructors about accessibility within the context of where the content is used. And we typically see with instructors that that's kind of the initial engagement point for them. There is a flip side to that, and we see that this is kind of being used more by instructors that have gone through the process of fixing a few or improving a few content items already, which is the course accessibility report. So this one provides a summary at the course level, kind of give an idea of how accessible the course is on average, how much content's in the course, and start to help with things like prioritization of content within the course. What should we think about fixing first or improving first, and actually helping the instructor work through that remediation process a little bit more effectively. So this part is really all about kind of the training and the feedback and the awareness side of things. And then John, over to you to say a little bit more about what we're seeing there.
So similar to the alternative format usage, as things transitioned into remote instruction, we also saw an uptick in the amount of files that were improved through Ally's instructor feedback. And so the line graph on the screen here shows files altered through Ally's feedback since May 2018. We've seen over 1 million files improved through the feedback, but in April, over 121,000 files that were improved during that month alone. And what's really encouraging here is that, in that initial rush to get courses online, to get digital content online, Ally is scanning that content. It's serving up those accessibility indicators to faculty so that they can make incremental progress and in real time be aware of what kinds of barriers are emerging in their courses, what can they fix on their own, and how can they, reach out more efficiently to folks on campus with some of the more challenging issues that they may see with their content. But we've also seen a real impact in terms of sustainable, scalable improvement. Obviously, the goal here when we're talking about faculty is to really catalyze a culture shift in how they think about and approach accessibility, from moving from accessibility as a kind of afterthought to really making inclusive design an integral part of their course design. And so, in terms of some of the data that we've seen and usage we've seen, 45% of the time that an instructor clicks on one of those indicators, they actually proceed to try to fix the file. So we see, at first that conversion rate tends to be a little bit lower as instructors are just getting aware, just building some familiarity, and then it starts to increase as they feel more confident, as they understand the guidance and how to effectively improve their documents. And then hopefully the next time they add a new content item, it's going to be more accessible from the start. 84% of those files altered through Ally's instructor feedback actually result in an improved accessibility score. So there's some strong evidence there that instructors are able to ingest the feedback, process it, and effectively improve their files. 50% of the indicator clicks are on red indicators. So those are low accessibility score items. So that may be due to a larger number of red indicators in courses due to, a number of accessibility issues with course content. Often historically, we have seen that accessibility, because it hasn't necessarily been something that's been prioritized with digital content, we do see a number of accessibility issues. We'll look at those numbers later in the presentation. But it also could be instructors really trying to prioritize some of those very impactful issues, trying to proactively remove barriers to improve the experience for all students. Nicholas also mentioned the course accessibility report, and we're seeing this become more and more a part of the workflow for instructors in engaging with their course and improving their files. So about 1/3 of the fixes through Ally that we've recorded are actually happening through that course accessibility report, using that as a lens into the course. And what's really interesting here is that among the 100 or courses with the most files improved, about 50% on average of those fixes are happening through the course accessibility report. So we're seeing that really be leveraged in courses with a lot of digital content and by instructors who are really making the most significant progress in terms of addressing accessibility issues. I'll pass it over to Christopher to talk about what's going on with the feedback at Utah State.
Thank you, John. The feedback and the prompts that Ally provides that you've just seen have been an incredible tool to help make it a little bit more difficult for instructors to claim ignorance or maybe ignore the issue of accessibility as they develop their courses, and help them to recognize when they're publishing content that is not accessible. And we started to see this exciting change where instead of us having to kind of, beg to get into faculty training meetings or, try to cajole people to stop by and talk to us at faculty development events, we would actually start to see people kind of line up to ask about how they can make their course more accessible, or reach out to us for help on making a Word document more accessible, for example. A pretty big change. And the one of the big things that has been released in this past year from Ally is the course accessibility report, where if somebody does come to us and they're interested in making their content more accessible, we can give them a quick link in their course that gives them that overview of everything in their course, shows them the things they're doing well, and gives a thumbs up on content that is accessible that they've built in a way that works for everyone, but also helps to highlight that content and give them a sense of where I can focus my efforts and what I can work on. And this idea of scaffolding engagement has been so incredible, really just a ground kind of breaking movement. And the way we approach this, one of the challenges with accessibility is all of you on this call are familiar with, it's kind of knowing where to start and how to get people on board as they get started in the field of accessibility. For example, if I have a teacher with a whole bunch of scanned PDF files, it would be so overwhelming to kind of say, you need to go make your course accessible. And they maybe start trying to make a PDF file accessible. They're going to get frustrated pretty quickly and feel like this is something that they don't have time to do, or that it's just too difficult and out of scope for what they should maybe be doing as an instructor. Whereas the instructor accessibility, the course accessibility report provides that, right, you can see right there, content with the easiest issues to fix. And so this is generally where we start the conversation with faculty. We give them that link. Here you go. Here are the overall issues in your course. If I were you, I would start by just clicking on that start button, issues, the content with the easiest issues to fix. And then Ally is going to walk them through one step at a time, how I can add alt text to an image or headings to a Word document, whatever those issues might be, and get them started and provide that immediate feedback so they can see their accessibility score go up and feel like they're making a difference in making their course content more accessible. Thanks, John.
Excellent, thank you. And then the last part that we wanted to talk about is really that institutional perspective. And I mean, some of the challenges that we see there, and that, I mean, typically, traditionally, it is very, very difficult for an institution to understand how they're doing from a course content accessibility perspective, just because of how much, I mean, just a vast amount of content that lives within the learning management system. I mean, we typically see for individual institutions over 1 million or millions even for the larger institutions. So there's just a lot of content. There's different types of content. There's new content being added and created all the time, continuously. And then there's there's different people creating that content as well. So all of that creates a real scale challenge, and just makes it incredibly difficult as an institution to know how you're actually doing, where the problems are, and actually allow you to make more informed decisions on how to prioritize, how to reach, who to reach out to, where to potentially organize training, and so on. The way in which this surfaces within Ally itself. So Ally, as we've been saying before, will actually go through all of the content within a learning management system. We'll scan it for accessibility issues, check it for accessibility issues. Based on that, it's going to provide a full institutional level course content accessibility report, which is going to try and provide some of that transparency, some of that insight that we were just talking about. So it's going to give you an idea on kind of how accessible your content is on average, how that's evolving over time. It's going to tell you kind of what the most prominent or most common issues are, what courses those issues live in, and so on and so on. So this is really aimed at providing some of that insight that traditionally is quite difficult to get, which can then be used to make informed decisions on, okay, where can we provide training? What issues should we focus on first? Who do we invite to that training? Can we actually see a noticeable improvement for some of the initiatives that we're taking, and so on? So that's really the core idea behind the institutional reporting. Obviously, the reporting goes down further. You can also now see it by individual department or at the individual course level.
So having that insight is just so important into understanding the types of issues that you see. And on the screen here, I'm highlighting just 6 kind of critical issues that Ally looks at inside of learning management system courses. And here we're looking at data from large US universities in their fall 2019 courses. Although I have to say, for the international audience, these numbers are remarkably consistent around the world. And so typically an overall file score, so the average score of a course file, and here we're primarily talking PowerPoint, Word documents, PDFs, images, on average, those large institutions scored around 39.7%. So some considerable accessibility issues facing a vast majority of content. On the other hand, the WYSIWYG content, so the HTML content authored within the learning management system, scores much higher, almost 99%. So quite minor accessibility issues compared to when you're talking about content like a PDF, an untagged PDF or a scanned PDF. And so that really also, I think, points to the value of tools like Christopher's that they're developing, where trying to remove the PDF from the equation and start to build more native web content for students to engage with. In terms of the total percentage of scanned PDFs, so around 16% of the PDFs that we looked at are those scanned PDFs, as Christopher demonstrated earlier. So they have usability issues. They're very limiting in terms of how you can use study tools, being able to highlight, copy and paste, annotate. 52% of those PDFs were untagged, so missing that critical metadata, the navigation structure that allows a PDF to be more reflowable, to allow it to be transformed, to be able to work effectively with assistive technologies. And so, you know, a lot of those that we're seeing are publisher resources that institutions, you know, from libraries and other databases, they're getting content that just is missing the tags, and is so important for those students. And and such a time-consuming process for institutions to remediate. In terms of documents, about 23% of documents on average were missing headings. And so this is simply an authoring technique using Word effectively, PowerPoint, and including a heading structure just improves the usability and quality of the content. And then in terms of image descriptions, 82% of images were missing a description. So a significant number of images that don't have an alt text for students using assistive technologies, for students who may be converting to MP3 and want to be able to listen to content and hear the content of audio of an image. But I also heard a really interesting example of an instructor talking about during their transition to remote instruction, students with bandwidth issues who were parked outside of gas stations to try to get free Wi-Fi, and that slow internet connection, some of the pages in their learning management system were slow to load, and large images in particularly wouldn't load. But if the image had an alt text, the student was still able to read and understand the content of the image. And so these, again, are accessibility issues that, of course, affect students with disabilities, but in particular in this transition to remote instruction, really impacting low-income students, first-generation learners, and students that generally may not have access to high bandwidth as well as computers that they usually rely on campus resources to access. During that transition, we saw a massive increase in digital content, as I mentioned. This is just looking at a few institutions in Texas, but we're currently doing more analysis here. But comparing March to 2019 to March 2020, a 403% increase in the amount of digital content added into courses. Roughly 6,700 PDFs, 3,000 Word documents, 1,600 presentations, and 7,000 more images added. And so when you think about those disability support teams that have to remediate this content, those teams did not increase overnight with this demand. And so having solutions, understanding where those barriers are from a data perspective, having tools in place to scale how you address these issues, just so critical when you have just this unprecedented increase in the amount of digital content uploaded into courses. I'll pass it to Christopher to talk how he's preparing at Utah State for the fall term.
Thank you, John. I love that introduction of how the increase in digital content. Based on our experience from the spring, we are anticipating this fall having significantly more online content and more students accessing that content online than ever before on our campus, at least. And I would guess that's the same for many of you. From an accessibility perspective, that can feel a little bit overwhelming. To kind of get an idea of how ready are we as we go into the fall semester to make sure we're providing those accessible and inclusive experiences. And this is where the Ally institutional report has just been invaluable to allow us to, on a minute by minute or daily basis, often to go in and see which new courses have been published and how accessible those courses are. We can also identify kind of what some of our biggest problem areas that we are facing across our campus. For example, how many of those scanned PDF files exist across all of our courses that have been published in fall semester. And then as we identify kind of not only problem areas, but even problematic courses. For example, we can see which of our courses are really struggling from an accessibility perspective, that are just publishing a lot of content that isn't going to be very usable or accessible. And from there, we can then reach out individually to those instructors to offer them our help and let them know that we have some resources available. It's been fantastic as well as we transition to online courses that Ally has provided those gentle reminders, as instructors develop their content. And then with a phone call from us or emails that we've sent out, we've really just seen participation in some of our training webinars and things like that has kind of skyrocketed as we've prepared for fall. This is on the radar of people. They really makes it a little bit more challenging again for them to pretend that this problem doesn't exist. They can be aware that accessibility is just part and parcel of developing online content, and then generally it's really helped in those conversations to bring those instructors online in creating content that's going to be accessible and usable for everyone. Thank you.
So just to summarize some of the key points from today's webinar, we talked about that inclusive pedagogy, the importance of empowering students with choices in how they engage with their learning materials, that one file doesn't fit all students' needs, and how alternative formats are one kind of tool that allows for that automatic conversion of content into different formats. We got to see a great example of, in terms of what Christopher and Utah State is doing as far as converting PDFs into native web content and some of the accessibility benefits there. We talked about the importance of scaling professional development, being able to catalyze this culture shift with instructors, help them become aware of accessibility issues, and ultimately make inclusive course design an integral part of their instructional design techniques, and how the instructor feedback really positioned within that course workflow helps to raise awareness, scaffold development, and really make that incremental progress in addressing accessibility issues. And as we saw with the institutional report data, those issues are pretty extensive right now, but we are making progress. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and we can see that very clearly in the important role that data and analytics will play in tackling these barriers to inclusion. And so that institutional report, really that window into accessibility across courses when it comes to digital content. To wrap up here, a few free resources we wanted to direct you to. You can try out using the alternative formats in a standalone tool called the File Transformer. I believe we'll be following up and sharing the links, so I won't read them out loud here, but you will have access to the File Transformer, a quick start guide to accessible content authoring, and then a pedagogical review thinking about inclusive course design, really drawing from universal design for learning. We have a very vibrant and active community of accessibility heroes at usergroup.ally.ac. Pictured on the screen here are some of our Marvel-style accessibility heroes. Christopher is a real leader and champion in that group, but great minds really coming together, problem solving, thinking about these accessibility challenges and how to solve them. And then next week, we have a BB World, so our annual Learning Management System conference. It's free this year, it's virtual. You can blast off to the future, hear about more on the Ally roadmap, hear more of our data and research that we shared a bit today, as well as hear some great presentations from current users and institutions with Ally, who are really taking some innovative approaches to their inclusive education challenges. And with that, we'll pause for Q&A.
Nicholas and John, thank you for sharing your information about tools and data from your perspective, and Christopher, to your lived experience at Utah State. We're talking about scaling inclusion, and it seems to me that part of this is about moving this activity of making course content accessible out of the disabled students office and empowering teachers and instructors and also students. And so this first question, I think, is to Christopher. I'm not sure we touched on it too much in the deck there. What about the importance of empowering the learners so that they can make wise decisions when they have a number of choices of different formats they could download? How do they know which ones will suit their needs the best?
That's a fantastic question, Richard, and a challenge probably on many university campuses sometimes, how to share new tools and resources such as Ally with with students and kind of helping people to be aware. One of the great tools or resources available from Ally is that it adds, when you enable that in your LMS, it adds a little icon right next to every piece of content, whether it's a PDF file, a PowerPoint, whatever it might be. Right there in the content. And so most of our usage of the tool, and we do have lot of students who are using that are just kind of curiously click on that. aside and apart from the marketing efforts we do to get the word out. Students just end up clicking on that link that shows the alternative formats that come up. And then, you know, for students with disabilities, we do some more targeted and kind of specific communication to let them know these specific formats are available to you, and with your accommodation requests that you've made would likely be helpful as you access this course material. But then for a lot of other students, it's just kind of trying things out. One of the formats is a Beeline reader that makes it easier to read the content with some, you know, neat coloring that it does of the text to kind of make it to help you go from line to line. Or maybe they prefer the EPUB file or just trying out the audio file. We've also had some word of mouth type of a thing of students just kind of trying out, figuring out that they can download audio file of a PDF, an audio file of a PDF document, take that with them, and then they'll maybe let other students know. So a lot of it's just students kind of figuring out on their own what works for them depending on the content as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then turning to the other piece of that is around, you know, supporting the teachers, instructors, those that put the course content together. Those were some scary numbers you gave us about the over 400% increase in digital course content from March 2019 through to March 2020. And also seeing, I guess, the number of, you know, disappointing to see the different formats that are getting uploaded and the challenge that brings. Nicholas, John, you talk about the metrics that come through your system. Do you see the proportion of reds coming down as instructors are learning about what makes for more inclusive content, or are they relying on the kind of automated remediation tools that come in products? Is the future looking brighter, or are we actually losing ground?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly we've seen some pretty compelling data. So when kind of Ally was first introduced to the market in you know, around 2017, the team did a data study, and the accessibility numbers that I shared today in 2017 compared to 5 years prior to that really hadn't budged much at all. It had been relatively consistent. And now we looked at our most recent numbers and institutions that had Ally for about a year or so, 2 years, they had actually made the amount of progress that they had made previously in 5 years. So we saw an accelerated rate of improvement happening. And so I think that was a really encouraging sign that because of that kind of integrated, seamless kind of approach, being able to raise awareness, empower faculty to make this part of their workflow, we're going to start to really make some headway. And of course, as the authoring tools like Word and PowerPoint make accessibility features more at the forefront of how you create content in those software, that's also going to help move the needle. We see our community also advocating to publishers, hey, you know, our instructors are using your article PDFs, they're coming up with these red indicators in their courses. We're not going to pay for your services if you don't supply us with accessible content. And so previously that conversation probably wouldn't have happened, or it wouldn't have happened at the same scale. But because faculty don't want those red indicators, now we see this new level of advocacy happening. And that's just such an important part of this as well, is really the advocacy in terms of, you know, ensuring that all of the content creators and publishers out there are providing accessible resources.
And just to add to that a little bit, so I mean, in summary, we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but it is going to be a very long tunnel and a very long journey. Obviously, I mean, there's so much content involved that there really isn't a silver bullet out there that allows you to address all of it in a very short period of time. So it's always going to be somewhat of a journey. One of the things that's been surprising to me is we've actually seen kind of a number of institutions make some incredibly fast progress, and actually they managed to get their institutional accessibility score into high 80s. We even have a few into the 90s, which is actually something that, given where we started, kind of which was kind of in the 30s range for most institutions, we'd never really expected that was going to be possible in such a short period of time. So we've seen some institutions, especially those with a lot of centralized control over things like templates and so on, make incredibly fast progress. For most institutions, it's obviously a lot slower, but on average, for the vast majority of institutions that we work with, we do see kind of incremental improvement and an increase in score as time goes by. And we've actually published some research papers on that as well.
Interesting. And John, you've talked about advocacy there and the increased awareness of the instructors about accessible formats, and I guess of learners too. In this webinar series, we've heard a lot also from publishers about the work they're doing to their front list titles, so that when they produce new titles that are born digital, they're also born accessible. I wonder, Christopher, if you see that increased awareness about inclusive formats amongst students and amongst the lecturers who are adopting textbooks, whether you see this behavior in terms of the content that's developed within faculty also transferring to them demanding more in terms of accessible formats for textbook and those resources that they're buying from publishers. Do you see evidence of that?
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the exciting things, because more than, just getting kind of twisting faculty's arms to make a specific piece of content more accessible, our goal is really to just help faculty become people, who this is part of their teaching practice, and to recognize the importance of accessible content. And so while it's certainly not across the board, but it's been fantastic to kind of help us identify some accessibility champions, individuals who, see a red indicator come up from Ally and really take to heart and almost take it personally to say, I'm not going to be the kind of person who publishes inaccessible content. And then as they do that, it's been really just fantastic to see some of those instructors carry that same attitude into the other teaching practices that they have. And so as they work with publishers, for example, that may be bringing up that question around, is this content accessible? And then coming back to us to help facilitate those conversations where it's not. And so certainly there's been, and that's probably the thing that I've been most pleased around. As was mentioned, the changes that happen semester to semester, we've certainly seen that incremental change going up and up, but more exciting to me has been just the conversations that are happening now that just weren't happening before. And I think those kind of go into all aspects of just an instructor kind of feeling like this is now part of my identity. I'm someone who cares about accessibility and that is going to work on creating accessible content. More so with instructors than with students, I think, but it's been certainly helped those conversations to happen on our campus.
Very nice. And it seems to me that really to scale inclusion, not only must we have tools to deal with legacy and existing inaccessible content, we really have to drive that so that inclusive content finds its way into the LMS and is purchased from publishers in the first place. That's how we truly scale with universal design content. I have some questions specific to the Blackboard Ally product before we move to our closing. So one question from Deirdre, which is understanding Blackboard Ally, and does that system work with all LMSs? So maybe one person could pick that off.
I'm happy to take that one. So it works with a number of different LMSs. So it works with Blackboard Learn, obviously, also works with Instructor Canvas, with D2L Brightspace, as well as with Moodle. So we have a very close and seamless integration with kind of the vast majority of the learning management systems that are out there. We also have a standalone API that can be used to integrate the same set of capabilities into other systems as well. And that could be outside of the LMS as well.
Super. Another question from Jalomi, which is, can Blackboard Ally work outside the United States?
And so happy to take that one as well. And so the answer to that one is yes as well. And actually one of the things that's been really exciting to me on this kind of journey is the fact that we've seen that momentum and we've seen that desire for more accessible and more inclusive course content. We've actually seen that across the globe. So, and we basically have institutions using Blackboard Ally all over the world in all continents. So yes, it is globally available. It's available in about 20 different languages. We're actually just in the process of adding Arabic to that as well. And it's hosted from a number of different places around the world as well. So short answer is yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And John, in your exposition of the inclusive learning resources, you mentioned the file transformer. This, I guess, is a web-based resource where whatever LMS you're using, or even if you don't have one, it sounds like this is a web-based resource where you can take inaccessible content and try out the magic beans of Blackboard Ally to do one-by-one transforms to accessible formats. Did I get that right?
That's correct. And so that was a resource that we released to support institutions during the pandemic, during their transition to remote instruction. It's temporarily available, and it will be available through the summer here. But it was a resource that we wanted to, offer the community to support them. And one of the really interesting stories, I got a message from a K-12 teacher who was working with a blind student and needed to convert her digital text into Braille, electronic Braille, for the student to access her materials. She was able to go to the file transformer and convert those digital texts into electronic Braille for that student pretty immediately. She said otherwise she would have been hand transcribing that content, and so it was a big time saver for her. So it's been really fantastic to just see the usage of it and to be able to offer something to the education community during these times.
Great. So a resource that's available for folk who are not using Ally and around the world. So I think that's a great value right there. Okay, we're coming to the end of this session. So if we could move to the wrap up slide, that's wonderful. Thank you to our panelists for sharing great information and insights. And thank you to everyone who joined us for today's session. Coming up in the remaining weeks of July, we have some more wonderful topics for you. On July the 22nd, in the Art and Science of Describing Images, we take a deeper dive into describing images, talking through plenty of examples and starting to address some of the more complex challenges which can arise from graphical complexity and from constraints like those found with tests. On July the 29th will be Word to EPUB Extended Tutorial, accessible EPUB in seconds. And this practical session will demonstrate how to get started creating accessible EPUBs from your Word documents. And it will then explain features beyond the simple one-click solution, including custom styling, page numbering control, multiple language support, including math content, customizing metadata, and much more. Now, if you're thinking about attending that session, or even if you're not, we want to highlight a webinar from our friends at DQ. Word document accessibility is crucial for customers, co-workers, or students with disabilities, and it's essential to get the best out of the Word to EPUB tool. On July the 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern, Karina Bocheva from DQ University will be running a webinar entitled Introduction to Word Document Accessibility. You can find out more information at daisy.org/webinars, where you can also sign up to the webinar announcements mailing list. Now that takes us to the end of July, and then in August, we will give you a well-earned break, but we already have some exciting webinars ready for our return in September. If you'd like to suggest a subject, or if you're considering presenting a webinar, then please email us at webinars@daisy.org. I hope you'll join us again next week. In the meantime, thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.